Josh Katzenstein, NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune, of course, covers the Saints, and he will be heading up to Indianapolis with fellow beat writer Herbie Teope within a week, where the NFL Scouting Combine is going to get started. Josh, appreciate you jumping on the show. And, you know, people see the Combine and see the shirts and shorts and the on-field workouts, and I think people are starting to understand more and more it's not just all about that. You've got all kinds of wheelings and dealings going on. Just kind of lay out what goes on as far as how active GMs and coaches and agents are, whether it's at the actual Combine, out in restaurants and stuff, as far as during that week, and how much discussion goes on outside of just the draft prospects.
I was hoping you were going to use my favorite term, the underwear Olympics, as some people like to call the Combine. But, yeah, I mean, it's really just like a big NFL convention. I mean, you have every GM and coach in town, you know, the scouting staffs from every team. You've got pretty much every agent is in town because there's a big agents meeting. And then they also want to be there, you know, working with, you know, their new prospective rookie clients. So, yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff that gets done. You know, different agents will have different dinner meetings with different teams. They'll all try to work out, you know, deals. Some of those meetings will happen, you know, closer to midnight. I remember last year I saw, you know, Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff, the Falcons GM, sitting with an agent that worked with Desmond Trufant. And, I mean, this must have been around midnight. They cracked open a nice bottle of wine, and then a couple days later, Desmond Trufant had big contract extension. So, I mean, there's so many things that happen. I mean, obviously, you know, for the prospects, you know, everything that happens on the field is important. Everything that happens in their interviews is just as important as what happens on the field. But then, you know, once those workouts are done, you know, all these teams just turn their attention to, you know, their roster or, you know, the free agents that are available, and they start to, you know, map out a plan for, you know, what their roster will look like for the next season.
So, Josh, if for listeners out there that are curious, what do you think the priorities are going to be for Mickey Loomis and Sean Payton, Jeff Ireland, the whole Saints brass in Indy once they get up there?
Well, I would think the first thing would be setting a meeting with Tom Condon, Drew Brees' agent. I mean, I would have to imagine that, you know, unless for some reason this is a simple negotiation and they can get something done before the Combine, that, you know, the Combine will probably be the best opportunity for them to sit down and talk about parameters of Drew Brees' deal. I mean, because that'll be about 2 weeks before free agency begins on March 14th. So, you know, Tom Condon can sit there and say that, you know, Brees will have an incredible market. The Saints could sit there and say, well, you know, he wants to come back and we want him back. And, you know, I don't know exactly how that negotiation will go, but I imagine, you know, a good chunk of it will happen at the Combine. Beyond that, you know, they'll probably talk to Senio Calamete's people. I don't know, you know, whether he'll be back, just because the market could determine his price and price him out of what the Saints want to pay for a guy who will ultimately, you know, be a backup. I mean, obviously guys get hurt and your sixth offensive lineman is going to play a lot, but, you know, in terms of his contract, I'm sure he wants to be paid as a starter, and he's earned that opportunity. Not sure, you know, about Kenny Vaccaro, but, you know, I mean, pretty much, I would imagine the Saints will meet with every agent of a free agent that they want to bring back. And then beyond that, you know, Jeff Ireland and his staff probably have a much different job, which is interviewing all of the players that are there, you know, whether it's formally or informally, and then paying close attention to, you know, what they do during the workouts. But, I mean, it's a busy time. I mean, you know, GMs talk to other GMs, you know, you know, I'm sure Sean Payton will, you know, maybe look at other coaches that are available. I mean, it's like I said, it's a convention, so, you know, pretty much anyone who's looking for a job or who has a job, you know, will be there. So lots of things could change.
Josh Katzenstein covers the Saints for NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune, joining us right here on Dunc and Holder. Which position groups while you're at the Combine, do you feel like you will pay most attention to because the Saints have maybe an obvious need at maybe a couple of positions?
I I mean, I think defensive end, much the same as last year. That's one spot where I don't think they've necessarily answered, their long-term problem. Obviously, I think Trey Hendrickson, should be able to provide some value and be a little bit better in his second year. I think Al-Qadir Muhammad could certainly, go from being an inactive guy to a backup role next year. But, even if they re-sign Alex Okafor, I mean, you have to consider he's coming back from a torn Achilles. And, as good as he was last year, he'll be a year older, coming back from the injury. And frankly, I mean, I think even with him playing well, you could argue that, a better player in that spot, could have made a world of difference for the defense. So I think if they can find another, one of those hybrid defensive ends who is just as good at rushing the passer as he is at defending the run, someone similar to Cam, I think that would be the priority. If that guy doesn't exist, which, he might not in this draft, just because, that's a tough guy to find at any point in any draft, and especially when you're picking 27th, it might just be like a speed rusher, but definitely someone coming off the edge who can put more pressure on the quarterback, who can make it harder for offenses to, just focus on blocking Cam Jordan. I think, that's got to be the top priority. Beyond that, I think nickel cornerback is probably a need that a lot of people aren't talking about right now. If they don't bring back Vaccaro, which, probably seems unlikely at this point, I would say that, nickel cornerback suddenly becomes a much bigger need. P.J. Williams can definitely fill that role, but, at some point you're going to need depth. So I think that's a spot. I know a lot of people are talking about wide receiver and tight end, so I'll pay attention to that. But, I say every year, in the draft, just because something isn't a need now doesn't mean it's not a need long term. I mean, you could draft pretty much any position knowing that with either injuries or contracts, that guy is going to be able to have an opportunity to fill a role within the next couple of years. So I'll try to pay attention as much as I can, but certainly defensive end is number one.
Josh, what do you think the Saints do with the restricted free agents, in particular Delvin Breaux, Willie Snead, Brandon Coleman, three guys that I could see kind of going either way on those guys. What are your thoughts on those three in particular?
Well, I mean, I wish I knew because, those are all pretty big-name guys. But I would think that the Saints tender all three. I mean, I think that's the smart move. The bigger question is at what rate you tender them because, I mean, if you go – so basically, for anyone who doesn't know, there's three different levels. There's the low tender, there's the second-round tender, and then there's the first-round tender. And basically, whichever tender you give them is what the other team would have to give up in order to sign him away. So, obviously, no one's giving up a first-round pick for any of those guys. Probably no one's giving up a second-round pick for any of those guys. But if they do the low tender, which is the cheapest, then, a team could sign them away pretty easily because I think last year that price was like $1.7 million. So, another team could easily give any of those guys a $2 million contract and, he suddenly walks away and the Saints get nothing. So I think it's a really tough decision for them. I could definitely see an argument for doing the second round tender, which is about $1 million more, I believe. I think last year was about $2.7 million. But at least, I mean, basically the Saints have to decide, how much they want those guys back. Because if it's worth an extra $1 million to keep them, then they're going to keep them because I don't think anyone's giving up second round pick for any of those three guys. So I think that's what I would probably do with all three of them, frankly. I mean, I think, Breaux, we've seen what he can do, and it's a question of if he'll get healthy, and I think that's worth $1 million risk just because of the value of his position. I think Coleman and Snead provide so much value in the run game, and if Snead could, bounce back to what he was before last season, I mean, that guy's definitely worth $3 million or probably even significantly more. So that's what I would do. I'm not sure what the Saints are going to do. Obviously, they don't have the best cap situation, so they have to, be really frugal where they can. So there's certainly a chance that they go low round on all those guys. But that's just, what I think the shrewdest approach would be.
Josh Katzenstein covers the Saints for NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. Follow him on Twitter at @Katzenstein. Hey, Josh, appreciate the time as always, and don't get too involved in staying up till 4 a.m. every night in Indy. Just stay up till like 3 a.m.
Yeah. No, I think I'm going to make sleep more of a priority than in past years. But, I go where the stories go, Larry.
I know. You get down and dirty in the dirt in the gutter at 4 a.m. at like a steak and shake or something. I know your plan.
No comment.
Exactly. Josh Katzenstein. Hey, Josh. Appreciate the time. All right, let's take a break right here on the show. When we get back, we can continue our conversation on who do you think should replace Jim Henderson in the Saints radio booth. If you want to get involved, 504-260-1280 is the number. On Twitter, I'd say the interactions got a lot of votes for Todd Graffagnini. So we know he's a candidate. So I don't know if Todd's paying them in nickels or quarters or what for endorsements, but that's probably about all he can afford. So
I think it's going to be an interesting decision. Interesting. And I think they'll probably, I'm just guessing, spitballing the timeline, but I would think they'd want somebody in place by the draft because I think that's usually a big day for the Saints play-by-play. I know Jim Henderson always manned that ship doing interviews with all the coaches and the GM on draft day. So I'm just thinking that's probably a soft deadline.
Yeah, I'd agree. So, all right, come on back. Sports 1280, NOLA.com, the iHeartRadio app. We're Dunc Holder.